They don't want to hear any of it because it so threatens their worldview that kind of deep evil still exists. I think it's easier for them to believe that that's not how it is, and they can just hate Israel for having to deal with these actions.
All right, Jonathan Sacerdoti, a distinguished journalist, broadcaster, and commentator with unparalleled expertise in international affairs, politics, and culture, is my guest today on the Dr. Phil podcast. Now, he is known for his sharp analysis and deep understanding, and has contributed to renowned platforms like the BBC, Sky News, and Al Jazeera. He was a lead contributor to several of Fox Nation's biographical documentaries, including on Benjamin Netanyahu and King Charles III. Now, whether unpacking the nuances of Middle East relations or diving into the evolving landscape of global politics, he brings clarity to even the most complex topics. I am really excited to speak with Jonathan today because, as he so eloquently expressed during his address to the Oxford Union, we are here to confront lies that masquerade as truth and accusations designed to inflame rather than inform. He's looking at this from a UK perspective. You all know that I have taken very strong positions on some of the Middle East situations from this side of the ocean, and I really am anxious to discuss this. So, Jonathan, welcome. Thank you for being with me today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you.
Well, Jonathan, I'm going to have to vent for just a few seconds. I kind of wake up every day shocked at some of the things that I'm seeing in America, some of the things I'm hearing at elite universities in the United States, things that I never in my lifetime thought I would see and hear on these campuses. The administration of these elite universities that, in my opinion, are supporting and, in some instances, encouraging demonstrations, groups, and protests that are just outright support of known terrorist groups. What I'm hearing from some of these students and outside agitators within these student groups, with the anti-Semitic rhetoric that I'm hearing in support of what started out to be Palestine and thinly veiled, and not very long into it, just straight up support of Hamas. I've been shocked by that. You're seeing it on that side of the ocean in Israel and the UK and that part of the world. What do you make of this? How is this happening in our lifetime?
It's difficult for me to witness it too. I mean, I'm a Jewish person. I'm a proud Jew. And my father was a Holocaust survivor. He was a hidden child in Italy, hidden by nuns in a Catholic orphanage for 9 months with his younger brother. So I've always been very alert to anti-Semitism and to threats against Jews, but also wider threats against our Western way of life and Western civilization, which ultimately is founded upon a foundation of Judeo-Christian values. So what's been happening since October the 7th has been deeply shocking to me, as much as to everybody who's been watching it. I think it's tragic that so much of the world seems to have embraced anti-Semitism, hatred of Jews, so readily. And the thing that triggered it, that enabled them to do so, that gave them somehow license in their minds to do so, was the most horrific slaughter and attack of Jews since the Holocaust. Of all the things that could make people think Jew hatred and persecution of Jews was okay now, you wouldn't have thought that it would be the slaughter of Jews by a jihadi Islamic organization in the land of Israel, the historic homeland of the Jews. So there are so many layers to what's going on that it is really difficult for all of us to see it. And it has permeated not just the education world, but it's out on the streets. We've seen these mob-like riots, these riot-like protests going on in the UK, around the world, around Europe. We've seen it in the National Health Service here, constant reports of persecution or prejudice against Jewish patients and Jewish doctors and staff even. We're seeing it in schools. I literally, just last weekend, was meant to go and speak at an elite private school in Wales, in South Wales here, which is a school that has been for years educating international students from around the world. It educates the Spanish royal family, but also carefully picked refugees from war zones who they give scholarships to try to encourage citizenship of the world, coexistence and peace. And they cancelled me a few days before the talk because they said that my articles that some of the children had read made me unsafe to be in the school. Now, that's absurd. That school, UWC Atlantic, was founded by a refugee Jew from Germany who came to the UK, founded that school and Gordonston, where King Charles III was educated, precisely with a view to building a unified worldwide youth who would be able to live together peacefully and understand each other's positions. And they cancelled me, a Jew, who was going to go there and speak about Israel, anti-Semitism, and my experiences as a journalist of those things. So the world is really in quite a depressing place, I think, when we think of it in those terms.
Well, it clearly is, and it seems to me to be, at a minimum, an absence of critical thinking. But I think it goes even further than that. I've invited those that are pro-Palestinian onto my platform, along with the pro-Israeli side. And when I listen to the Palestinian supporters, their position is this was retaliation, that October 7th was retaliation for years and years of oppression, years and years of holding these people in prison and calling Israel an apartheid state that was oppressing the Palestinians. And then they start doing the math and saying, look how many Palestinians have been killed compared to the number of Israelis that were killed. Grade my paper here. I want to know if I'm looking at this too simplistically. But first off, when I look at what happened on October 7th, this wasn't an act of war. It was a war crime. These invaders into Israel came in and attacked largely non-combatants. They came in high on drugs, for one thing. They attacked women, children, the elderly, infants in their cribs. I mean, I've been to the kibbutz. I've seen the blood dried an inch deep in infant cribs and splattered on the walls. I've seen the footage that 99% of America or the world have not seen, that the IDF shared with me under very close guard. And people say, well, why don't they just show that to the world? You really can't do that. Some of that you just can't unsee. And if children pull this up on YouTube or whatever, I mean, it's so horrific that it changes you when you see it. And they say, well, look, there were more people killed with the retaliation into Palestine. Hamas knew exactly what was going to happen when they did what they did. They knew they were putting Palestinians in harm's way when they did that. They set up their command centers. They set up their ammunition stores. They set up their operations in schools and libraries and hospitals and neighborhoods, and then run back and hide there. They are the ones that put, if they were civilians, put those civilians in harm's way. And collateral damage from dropping a bomb is not the moral equivalent of what was done in Israel on October 7th. And I have never seen a warring nation go to such lengths to protect against civilian casualties. They drop leaflets, they make announcements, they do everything they can to say, this is going to happen, you need to get out. And of course, Hamas won't let them leave oftentimes, but I've never seen an enemy warn that they're getting ready to hit a certain area to allow people to get out of the way. What am I missing here?
Well, Dr. Phil, let me just say, thank God for you and people like you who can so clearly express what you just did. And you are also one of those people that made a point of going to Israel to witness what happened, as I have in my work. You know, I've walked through the same kibbutzim as you. I've walked through the same horrible, horrible homes with blood sticky on the floor still, the burnt out homes from the thermobaric weapons that the Palestinian terrorists used to not just kill, but bake, roast alive people in their own homes. They attacked, they kidnapped, they tortured, they raped. They did everything you could think and more to those people, many of them in their own homes, in their beds. They tortured and killed children in front of their mothers, mothers in front of their children. They live streamed it so that it would psychologically torture the friends and family of the people they were killing or kidnapping. So I think it's very important that those of us who have seen that footage, like you and me and others around the world, do talk about it. I agree with you that it would be very hard for many people to stomach seeing it, but I also think on another level, maybe adults of their own free will should see that sort of material if they want to. It's like when you think back to the Holocaust, the idea of seeing the camps as they were liberated, the skeletal people who were being rescued from them, those sorts of images stick in our mind. And unfortunately, I think it's got to a point in the modern day where so many people in the comfort of the US or the UK or around Europe or other places in the world, we live such comfortable lives that we've come to assume that human nature is such that nobody acts barbarically or viciously as the Palestinian jihadi terrorists did on the 7th of October. But the truth is unfortunately far uglier. And so watching that kind of footage and witnessing these things for oneself does remind us that human nature is not automatically good. Not everybody has the same values we do. And those who don't have those values are inferior to us in their values and culture. There is nothing wrong with us saying that the values we hold dear of preservation of life and defending civilians and fighting against that kind of jihadi enemy, that is something we should be proud of. And it is something that we should be able to say is worthwhile and superior to the alternative.
Did you know that high blood pressure is the #1 risk factor for mortality? 1 in 2 adults has it. That's a 50-50 chance you are a walking time bomb. But here's the good news. You can take control of your blood pressure naturally without relying on Big Pharma. 120 Life combines delicious super fruit juices proven to help lower blood pressure. Backed by hundreds of doctors and trusted by thousands with real results, it's a solution you can rely on. The best part? It's risk-free. Try it for 2 weeks. If your numbers don't improve, you get your money back. Lower blood pressure or your money back. Nothing to lose, everything to gain. Go to 120life.com. That's 120life.com and use code PHIL, P-H-I-L, to save 15% and get free shipping. This is serious. This is your life we're talking about. 120 Life can help.
And so what I'll say about the situation in Israel is this. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that anything is black and white in that part of the world. And I'm not suggesting that there are not great tragedies going on when innocent people are killed in war anywhere on this planet. So, of course, all of us have emotional reactions to seeing people in Gaza who are suffering as a result of this war. But as you so rightly pointed out, there is no moral equivalence between the deaths of civilians in a war zone and the deaths of those people that the Palestinian terrorists slaughtered on the 7th of October in these circumstances. The Israeli army, and I, like you, have been and visited them. I've been on the air bases. I've been for briefings. I've seen footage that they've shown to me of the strikes they've carried out. I've seen the extraordinary lengths that they go to mitigate civilian casualties. Now, many people will say, so why have there been civilian casualties? We don't yet know any real numbers because the numbers that many have been relying on in the Western media are fed to them by Hamas health authorities in Gaza. And really, Hamas is not an honest player in any regard. But of course, some people have died. Some people have been killed as a result of, as you call it, collateral damage. It's a horrible euphemism, but we have no words really to explain better. But that is not the same as targeting civilians. Israel is not targeting civilians. The Israeli army does go to extraordinary lengths to try to avoid killing civilians. And the reason that there are the number of civilian deaths there are and injuries is that forces like Hamas, a terrorist organization, deliberately draw fire on civilian areas. They hide themselves in their operations under hospitals or schools. Hamas itself was founded in 1987 as a branch off of the Mujama al-Islamiyah, which itself was founded after the Muslim Brotherhood was banned in Egypt and then found fertile ground in Gaza for creating a civilian infrastructure operation. So they deliberately started by setting up schools and kindergartens and universities like the University of Gaza, but with the express intention of, in time, using the unity and network they created through those civilian means to create a violent jihadi organization which would strive for an ummah, a worldwide Islamic state. And I think that people who don't know the history of those organizations, people who don't know the ideology of those organizations, they can just go and read the Hamas founding charter. It's available online. Anyone can go and read it. It's very, very clear what they believe in. They believe in killing Jews. It's not about land. It's not about occupation. It's not about better electricity or humanitarian aid. These are not the things that they talk about in their founding documents and in their ideological texts. What they talk about is jihad, holy war against Jewish people. And they don't stop at Jews. Fundamentalist Islam, which is a threat to the whole Western world, is actually set on killing first the Saturday people, as they say, and then the Sunday people. So we are all in this fight together internationally. In that regard, that's why Israel deserves our wholehearted support in the West, both in the United States and here in the UK and across Europe, because the problems that Israel is not just facing, but facing down at the moment, are the very problems that we are also facing. And if we don't learn from Israel and we don't help Israel now, we will find that we may ourselves be facing these problems and not know how to cope with it.
Well, I think we're already starting to face them in the United States. As we speak right now, there are 200 people occupying Trump Tower in New York City because they are demonstrating against the detention and removal process to deport a green card holder who has been organizing and carrying out protest in support of Hamas, a known terror group that wants to wipe out Israel off the face of the earth, a group that has killed Americans. And he's here as a green card holder, which is a privilege, not a right. He is speaking out against America and supporting a group that has killed Americans. They have said, look, you're here as a guest. You're here as a privilege, not as a right. And we don't want people here that are politicking against our foreign policy and supporting groups that kill Americans and advocate killing Americans. And they're there protesting. Now, what he's actually said, I can't speak to. I've not seen what they say are the things he's handing out, the flyers, the pamphlets, all of this. I can't speak to that personally because I haven't seen it. All I know is what I have seen and read in the press, which I don't ever trust until I see some of the documents myself. But we have people like that that are citizens of America. When I say that an absence of critical thinking, I've seen Gays for Gaza banners 12 feet long. I just think, my God, why don't you march into Gaza with that and see how tolerant they are? Whereas you can march down the street in Israel with that and people would fall in behind you. You cross into Gaza, you wouldn't make it 30 feet before you would be dead. I don't get how they don't think through that. They talk about Israel being an apartheid state. My God, have they looked who sits on the courts? Are there any Israelis living in Gaza, let alone holding office?
You know which Israelis are living in Gaza? The ones they took hostage, who they're starving and torturing and beating, and who they've killed a number of. Those are the only Israelis. Those are the only Jews living in Gaza, the Jews that they stole and kept there and imprisoned there for well over 500 days. And to anyone that calls Israel an apartheid state, they really need their head checked. Because if you think, where are Arab gays most free in the Middle East? State of Israel. Where are Arab women most able to be educated and free and live free lives and go out unsupervised in the Middle East? State of Israel. So the idea that Israel is the problem in that region is insane. Israel is the solution, not just to that region, but to many of the problems that the world is facing. And when you talk about Mahmoud Khalil, this guy who's been arrested and detained, there is a lot to say about him. And as it's going through the courts, one doesn't want to second guess exactly what we know about him. And a lot of it is, as you say, reported in the media, and it needs to be verified. But he was certainly a prominent figure in those Columbia protests. Despite having graduated, he was seen last week negotiating on behalf of students and who barricaded themselves inside Barnard College, Columbia's women's college. And he was seen holding a megaphone and reprimanding the university president. So this is certainly someone who's very active with that. And as you say, being a green card holder doesn't give you exemption from behaving correctly. In fact, quite the opposite. You're basically on probation. It's not citizenship. I know that a large number of green card holders, something like 15,000 a year on average, lose their green card for various reasons. So the idea that he could lose his for this is certainly not unthinkable. And I think that it's extraordinary that the left has this kind of automatic defense of him. And I'm sorry to make it a left-right thing, but it does seem to be that way. Donald Trump, whether one likes him or not, whether one voted for him or not, was elected in no small part due to his promise to crack down on campus extremism and to punish violent Hamas supporters who were disrupting not only university life, but also major US cities. And he acted swiftly on that promise through his executive orders. He's encouraged the administration to use every available tool to hold rioters accountable. And this is what we're seeing happening now. His political opponents, however, are opposed to that, I think, because Donald Trump is doing what he said he would do, because they don't want to grant him a victory in that. But this shouldn't be about petty politics. America is a wonderful country, and one where if you do show support for terrorism, or if you do disrupt the lives of Jewish students on campus, or if you do engage in behavior that is illegal in any way, and I say if, I don't know the details of what Mahmoud Khalil has and hasn't done, we'll find it out. But if you do, of course, the law should take effect. This is not about freedom of speech. Freedom of speech doesn't give you a license to do whatever you like and to bully and to persecute other people, not Jews, not anyone.
Let's cut to the chase. Your savings could be in serious trouble. When Elon Musk is out here warning us to brace for temporary hardship, you might want to listen. I trust Preserve Gold to safeguard my accounts, and I urge you to do the same. They're the only precious metals company I recommend. Are you going to sit back and hope for the best or take control of your financial future? Text Dr. Phil to 50505 to get your free Precious Metals Guide from Preserve Gold. With gold prices recently breaking records and analysts predicting this trend to continue through 2025, you cannot afford to wait. As a bonus, you can get up to $15,000 with a qualified purchase from Preserve Gold. So don't wait. Text Dr. Phil to 50505. That's DRPHIL to 50505 today. I suppose it's a narrower lane if you are a guest in this country, a green card holder, a visa holder, but you don't have that right if you're an American citizen. you can't incite people to violence. You can't incite people to the overthrow of the government or to violence and supporting terror groups that interfere with the foreign policy of the country. That's not part of your First Amendment protections. There are limits to that. I just find it really shocking that people aren't stepping back and thinking, okay, wait a minute, what is it I'm fighting for here? What is it that I'm trying to protect here? And is this something that makes good public policy? Because our laws flow from good public policy. And Israel, they talk about Israel being apartheid. We have Arabs in the judiciary putting Jews in prison, and they say this is an apartheid state. How?
Putting presidents and prime ministers, former presidents and prime ministers have gone to jail. I forget whether it was a president or a prime minister who an Arab judge put in jail. You know, that doesn't tend to happen in many countries by any judge, but in Israel, by an Arab judge. So, of course, Israel's not perfect, by the way. I know you wouldn't say it, I wouldn't say it. All functional states, especially democracies, go through massive divisions and tensions, and Israel's no different. In fact, Israel has some massive challenges to deal with. But I think that, you know, these slurs of apartheid and genocide as well, the other one, all of these things, they have real meanings. And I think that the people that try to use them as weapons against the state of Israel, often because it is the Jewish state, and I'm not ashamed to say that. People say, oh, you always try and deflect it by saying, oh, it's the Jewish state. But it is, I think, a great motivation for many people for that animosity towards the state. Because if they actually evaluated it on the facts and what's going on, they wouldn't be so unbridled in their hatred towards that country. But whatever the reason, you know, these words have meanings, and those meanings are clearly not applicable to Israel, the state of Israel, what it's doing. It may get things wrong, as I said, and I think especially during wartime, there are often instances where things go wrong, but it's more about how a state tries to engage in its war and deals with things that go wrong when they do, if they're identified and investigated. So those are the important things to focus on as well. And I think that in terms of the US and the UK, it's been really baffling and utterly depressing for many of us to see the sort of tide come in of people who just threw out their critical thinking, as you said. They just cast it aside and just went for these knee-jerk reactions, often with very little knowledge of what they were talking about. I mean, some of these activists and protesters who've made themselves very visible, very vocal, speak from a position of unique ignorance. They know nothing about the region. Many of them have never been there. Many of them have never met Israelis and Palestinians. Many of them just seem to get involved because it's the current cause du jour. But I think that if people are encouraged to listen to a variety of voices from all sides and to evaluate things for themselves, we'd be in a much better position, because I think people will understand it's a complicated situation, but certain parts of it aren't that complicated. You know, there is no compromise to be had with a jihadi organization that wants to wipe out Jews. It's not like you can negotiate with that and say, well, okay, just wipe out half of us and that'll be fair. It doesn't work that way. And I think that Israel doesn't have the luxury of coddling people in the way that perhaps some Western countries have done in their misrepresentations of what's going on. Israel's a country that's been fighting for the last 17 months, absolutely an existential war on several fronts. And one of those fronts has been this information or propaganda war, which the terrorists have been assisted in by large parts of the Western media, who've absolutely credulously repeated propaganda and nonsense that's been fed to them. And then if questioned, they say, well, Israel wouldn't let us into Gaza, so we unquestioningly take the word of the terrorist organization who fed us this information. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. They could do some work to try and spread actual knowledge and understanding of the region, but they're definitely not doing that in many cases.
How did it spin so quickly? Because when October 7th happened, I think the general response of the world community was, this was horrific. I think the knee-jerk reaction of the world community was, oh my gosh, this was terrible. And the footage that was found on cell phones that were left behind with a lot of those that had been killed, and some of the body cam footage, GoPro footage, whatever the invaders had and started streaming or posting up on the internet and bragging about, people saw and thought, oh my God, these people are total psychopaths. I mean, they have no empathy. I saw videos of invader calling home, I killed 10 Jews. Oh my, it was like they'd won the lottery. I mean, they were up so high, sky high, and the parents said, I can't wait for you to come home. Oh, I'm not coming home. I'm doing all of this. And so celebratory. And I think people were appalled. But in a matter of days, it seemed to start turning. Why? How did that happen? Why did it turn so quickly?
I wish I knew the answer to that question, because it's one I've been asked a lot. And in my work, I get asked very often, what is the root cause or the reason for anti-Semitism or hatred of Jews? To such an irrational level, as you say, when you look at things like that, to then hate the victims of it is bizarre. And I don't know the answer. I mean, there are many possibilities. I think that level of racism, of hatred against Jews is like a mental illness. But like many mental conditions, I think there's a degree of contagion as well, and fashion. So I think that when some people, especially younger people who are more impressionable, who are more passionate, who are more activated by political causes surrounding them, I think sometimes when they hear it, and they hear it with such fervor and enthusiasm from those around them, they can be easily led towards that. I think that also it's problematic that these groups like Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad or Hezbollah or any of a number of other groups who are behind these attacks on Israel, not least the Islamic Republic of Iran, the regime there that punishes its own Iranian people as well, most of whom do not wish to be under its rule. All of those groups are very, very good at spreading lies and spreading fake messages and deceptions about what's going on. So those who don't know what's happening are fed a constant flow of that sort of fake news, misinformation, lies, whatever you want to call it. And it becomes very easy to believe. Now, I've always said that the biggest problem in explaining these things is that the truth is very complicated and often quite ugly. So a lot of times, Israel's choices aren't between 1 and 2, good and bad, black and white. Often the choices that it has to make are between 2 quite horrible options, and they have to choose the least horrible. One good example is in the negotiations for the release of the hostages. Hamas and the other Palestinian terrorists that burst over the border deliberately took as many hostages as they could, because they know that this is their strongest weapon against Israel. So they took hundreds, children, infants, elderly people, Holocaust survivor, people in their 80s. And we know, that the Bibas children came back dead, for example. Now, those children didn't deserve that. But what the Hamas terrorists know is that Israel, given the choice of getting back even the corpses of the kidnapped, but especially those still alive, and releasing hundreds or thousands of Palestinian prisoners who were in jail for having carried out horrific mass killings, suicide bombings, or other acts of terrorism in the past, Israel all too often will choose to release those violent, ideological, jihadi killers, knowing that they will act again in that way in order to get back the hostages. Those are 2 dreadful options, bad and worse. And it's really hard to know which one should choose. There was no good option for them to choose. But of course, a country like Israel, which is led by a very moral commitment to its people, to save lives, to save their lives, to rescue them if they're taken hostage, made the difficult decisions it has. And because it's always done that in the past, dating back even to the Jabril incident many years ago, was the sort of first big hostage exchange. But even looking at things like the Entebbe raid, when the terrorists took a whole plane of people hostage, they know that Israel will do whatever it can to get back hostages. And so they know that this is their ultimate weapon. I think that that's just one example of the complicated decisions that country has to make. And given that those things are so complicated, it's much easier for people who don't understand things well but want clarity to believe a beautiful lie rather than the ugly truth. And in many cases, I think that's what's happened. They've been spun a yarn about colonialism and imperialism. They've been given this very black and white kind of vision of oppressors and oppressed, victims and oppressors, David and Goliath. And these don't really fit to that situation. The situation is far more complicated and presents so many dilemmas that I think for many people, they don't even want to entertain the idea, just the same as they don't want to acknowledge what was in those videos you've seen and I've seen, just as they don't want to hear any of it because it so threatens their worldview that kind of deep evil still exists, that I think it's easier for them to believe that that's not how it is, and they can just hate Israel for having to deal with these actions.
You mentioned the hostages, and are we in the second phase now of this ceasefire? Is it phase 2 now? What do you think is going to happen? Do you think this ceasefire will hold? Do you think Hamas will violate? I think they've already violated it, but is there any chance for this to succeed? Will hostages be released? Are they now down to just bodies to turn over, or are there still people alive?
There are a number still alive, and there are a number who are dead. And I think that the Israeli authorities and intelligence services and negotiators have a good sense of what those numbers are. And I think that President Trump has been admirable in his emphasis on this point, that there is an obligation, a duty, a human duty, moral responsibility to do everything that can be done to bring back the hostages, especially those who are still alive, but also the bodies of those who aren't, so that their families can give them a respectful burial and have some form of closure to their horror. So I think there are hopes that there will be more released. And yet, as I said, it's very, very complicated. Some of the terms that the terrorists want in order to release hostages are just too much for Israel to consider them. But on the other hand, the idea of leaving hostages in that hell indefinitely or forever is also completely unthinkable. So an impossible dilemma for anyone. I think that in that respect, Trump's had a lot of criticism for some of his unpredictable or bullying behavior, not just in relation to Israel and the Palestinians, but in his dealings on the world stage generally. But I think there's a good reason that he's behaving that way. I'm not sure if it is necessarily the right answer, but I think to some extent, in this specific case, that kind of tough talk, those kinds of threats, and the sense that he might actually mean them, nobody really knows, is what might motivate these brutal terrorists to actually move somewhat from their entrenched positions. And so, yes, you say there was the second stage. Well, the original ceasefire blackmail deal to receive hostages was done in stages, and stage 1 was completed. Hamas did break many of the terms along the way. I mean, one particular way were those 6 shows that they put on as they released hostages, and various other things. They at one point gave back a dead body that wasn't the Israeli woman who they had kidnapped, and that was also against the terms of the deal. So they've broken many of the rules, but again, I think they know they can, because there is a certain level of that kind of behavior that Israel, the West, America will tolerate if they're still getting hostages back. So I don't know exactly how it will unfold going forwards, but there is hope for many of those hostages who are still there. I just think, though, I just urge people to imagine what it must be like for those people being held. We don't need to imagine from nothing anymore, because some of the hostages who've been released in recent weeks have been giving interviews, and you can find them online, some of them with subtitles in English. And really the level of depravity and horror and barbarity that they were treated with is horrific to think about. The idea that one hostage I heard being interviewed this week on Israeli television said that he had his birthday and they beat him on his birthday, and he just prayed not even that he would be free on his next birthday, but that he wouldn't be beaten in this way. He was beaten so much he would fall unconscious and then wake up again still being beaten. They would be given, one piece of pita bread in a day between several of them, half a liter of water between more than one person for the whole day. That they were kept underground in these tunnels that Hamas dug, specially using the money, using the aid that the world had given the Palestinian people. So all of these things are just beyond our comprehension, beyond our imagination. And yet I think it's so important that people do think on it and do comprehend it as best they can, because only by doing that can they understand the problems, the dilemmas that Israel is facing, and therefore the very extreme measures it's having to go to try to protect its people and to try to eliminate this problem from happening again and again in the future. Because that's really, I think, the other challenge that that country faces. This problem is not going to go away through placating or playing kind with the people that do those sorts of things. It's not something that you can do. There is only one language that I think that form of terrorism understands, and that is force and defeat. And Israel needs to win this in order to protect its future.
Well, when I sat with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and he was so gracious to give me so much time in Jerusalem in the middle of this war to sit with me and go in depth about this. My profession is to read people. And he looked me in the eye and said something that I'll never forget. He wanted world support, but with it or without it, he said Israel has to wipe Hamas out completely. Anything else is just kicking the can down the road. Anything else, they're just going to regroup, restaff, get more people and more equipment and come back at us again. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. He said, I have to wipe them out completely, 100%, or they're just coming back on another day. How do you live across a fence from a group of people who have one prime objective, and that's for you to be dead? You can't negotiate with those people. And if you allow them to continue to be there with that objective, how does that work? I don't see an outcome there other than they either have to be relocated way away from you or they've got to be wiped out. They want you dead. This isn't about land. It's not about real estate. This is a religious war, and they want you dead. How is there any other outcome?
So I think you've identified another of those impossible dilemmas that Israel faces, because, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu did say that to you and to many others, and I watched his interview with you. There are plenty of criticisms for his behavior, both during this war and before it. Ultimately, he was the man who was in control, in command the day this happened. And so the fact that it was not spotted, it was not stopped, the fact that the response was too slow on the day, all of those things, ultimately, he does bear some responsibility for those as well. And yet, I'm not here to try and blame Benjamin Netanyahu specifically. History will judge him in due course, and plenty of people right now, even within Israel, are judging him already for it, and that is their right to do so. It's a vibrant democracy there. I'll say this, though, that there's almost no chance of Hamas being defeated and eradicated. And even if Hamas is defeated or eradicated in the Gaza Strip, as is his stated aim, and as is the stated aim of Donald Trump at the moment, there is still the problem that it represents quite a mainstream and sizable part of the Palestinian ideology, the Palestinian political identity and social identity. Even the so-called moderate Fatah and Palestinian Authority are themselves quite difficult and complicated, to understate it, organizations for representing the Palestinian people. The Palestinian Authority, which governs in the West Bank, does so without a particular democratic mandate. Mahmoud Abbas is many, many years into what was meant to be a brief term as president. They give money to terrorists who have been convicted of killing people. They actually have, what's dubbed a pay-for-slay policy, where it's enshrined in their laws that they give money to those who kill people, or to the families of those who they call martyrs, i.e. terrorists who died whilst killing Jews, Israelis, and others in Israel. So this idolization of killing other people, indeed this idolization of death within their own culture, the idea that to die as a martyr slaughtering Jews or Israelis makes you somehow elevated religiously and in the afterlife, these are very problematic concepts. Israel has to deal with those neighbors whatever happens. So even the defeat of Hamas will not truly defeat the jihadi and extremist Islamic strain of Palestinian identity, much of which is focused simply around what they call resistance of Israel. But if their entire identity is focused around resisting and killing and erasing Israel, there's very little Israel can do except fight that constantly.
And that just seems like such a burden to live under. And talking to the Israelis, they do adapt. You do kind of get desensitized. Days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, months turn into years, and you just learn to adapt to it. And it's a terrible thing to adapt to, but I guess you learn to live with it until something like this happens and you have a day where more Jews are killed in any one day since the Holocaust. It kind of shakes you into the reality of who's living on the other side of the fence. But you mentioned that they refer to it as resistance. What do you say to these people that do try to characterize this as fighting back, as resistance, as rebellion against oppression? Look, I'm a geopolitical expert. My lane is psychology and how people react to these things. So I don't understand all the nuances, but I can read, and I go back several thousand years, and it just seems to me when you put together the timeline, this is Israelis' homeland. They've been driven from it and come back, but I don't understand how they are characterized as colonialists. This seems to me to be their homeland. As I say, they've been driven off of it and come back, but how do you respond to the Palestinians that say they are oppressed, they are imprisoned, and they want their homeland back?
The people that try to characterize the Palestinian cause, the Palestinian fight, as one of seeking statehood, of one of having their own independent sovereign state, fail to explain why every time the Palestinian people have been offered exactly that, their own state, they have walked away from it, refused it, and even worse, carried out more atrocities against the people who were willing to make that deal with them. I think that is the clearest fact that reveals the lie behind the claims that this is a movement for national identity, for self-rule and sovereignty, to live in peace alongside Israel, to coexist alongside a Jewish state. There have been just too many opportunities, and you don't need to take my word for it. I know what happens when I talk about this. I get inundated with comments and messages from strangers across the world accusing me of lying. Listen to Bill Clinton. He said it recently. He said that many of the young people, especially today, who are so animated about this, have no idea what happened 25 years ago. He says he personally shepherded this deal into place that could have given them almost everything they asked for. Ehud Olmert recently showed that map of what he offered when he was Israeli Prime Minister. There have been so many opportunities for the Palestinian people to fulfill the dream of having their own state, if that truly were their dream. And to say that being a downtrodden people or a people who have suffered means that they weren't able to do that, or that they didn't get what they wanted 100%, also ignores the fact that the Jewish people, when they had the rebirth of the State of Israel, did so from a position of almost extinction, a position of genocide having been carried out on them in the Holocaust. 6 million Jewish people killed because they were Jews for no other reason, not because they had a state and not because they had wealth or not because of their politics, but just because they were Jews, just because of Jewish blood running through their veins. And yet the Jewish people managed to make a thriving democratic state, which has been an enormous success in that region. So peoples who truly seek and strive for statehood of their own, for national self-determination, even from the grimmest of backgrounds, are able to fulfill that dream. The Palestinian people have proven themselves not just not capable of doing that time and again, but I think they've proven that that's not really what they're asking for predominantly, certainly not through their mainstream political movements. Now, of course, there will be people who identify as Palestinian people by any definition, who want to live in peace and have a quiet life free from any form of difficulties, war, bloodshed, who want to live in peace. Of course, there will be people like that. Unfortunately, those aren't the people who Israel, the West, the US is having to deal with to try to resolve this decades or centuries old conflict. The people who are responsible for perpetuating that conflict are often ideologically and religiously motivated in a way that just is not possible to negotiate with. It's not possible to negotiate politely with people who simply have one aim, which is to kill you and to torture you on the way. That's not something that any sane nation, sane peoples, or sane individuals will be able to succeed in. And yet that is what the world constantly asks Israel and Israelis to do time and time again. And every time they're told, just try it this time, and if it doesn't work, well, then the world will know. But that's happened so many times over. The very idea that Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip unilaterally, and that then in just a matter of a few short decades experienced this bloodbath as a result of years of build-up inside the Gaza Strip of Palestinian terrorism and of Palestinian jihadi ideology, it just shows you what happened. And in every other example of an attempt to make peace and to live peacefully and to coexist alongside them, they have turned it around into a springboard for more bloodshed, more attacks on Israel. So I think it's very difficult to characterize the conflict in those terms that those people do. And I just urge them, I understand not everyone who listens to me or to you will agree with us. They think we have strong views, and we do, and they think that means that what we say shouldn't be listened to. But I say, listen to everybody. Listen to what everybody says, not just me. Listen to what they say and then see what they do as well. And then try and stand back and judge it, especially if you're not personally involved. Try and judge what they really mean, what they really say, both in Arabic and in English, what they say in Hebrew and in English. Judge what they do, how they've acted over time. Israel, for example, has made great concessions in its history. It's given away large areas of land that it had control over in order to make peace with Arab neighbors who genuinely had an intention of doing so. And not all of those ended perfectly in sort of messianic peace, but they ended in a form of an agreement that stopped people attacking and killing one another. So even a cold peace is better than conflict. And Israel has proven itself through its actions historically to be willing to do that. It did that when it gave the entirety of the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt and made a peace deal with Egypt. So I think that people of goodwill and people who are genuinely trying to understand this conflict just need to read their history and just need to look at what's happened in the past to understand that Israel is a serious partner for peace. But where there is no prospect of peace and there is prospect only of further bloodshed and attack and terrorism and jihadi bloodthirstiness, well, then it knows how tough it has to be in fighting that off in order to continue to exist. And so that's really the only position from which I think there could be a hope for future coexistence and peace.
Well, I couldn't agree more. We just have a couple of minutes left, and I just have to ask you, Not long ago, I was very proud to receive the Allyship Award from the Simon Wiesenthal organization in Toronto. And it was there that I had some time and watched your presentation at the Oxford Union. I've been invited to speak there this summer. You made a post after that. You said the experience of speaking at the Oxford Union last night was sobering. It had been packed with aggressive and closed-minded people, including the president, who invited us to speak on a warped motion and attempted at every stage to undermine us. The level of support for terrorist and actions was chilling. And you went on to say that many Jews that were going to attend told you that they just feared being there. And I watched your entire speech, which was, I thought, very courageous. And I thought you were a study in patience and self-control, because they were baiting you at every turn, calling you every name in the book, and you didn't take the bait. You stayed on point. And I just wondered if you could opine on that experience in the face of such hatred, name-calling, and attacks from people that just seemed ignorant. They're just uninformed. You seemed to stay calm in the face of it all. What was it like?
Well, firstly, thank you for your kind words about it. It was an extraordinary experience. I was a student myself as an undergraduate many years ago in Oxford University, and it wasn't exactly like that when I was there. But there were hints already, even back then, of anti-Semitism in that institution, the Oxford Union, the debating society, as I mentioned in that speech. And you know, I've been, as much as I was upset by what happened there and disgusted by that behavior, I've also been enormously reassured by the response that it's had from around the world, because the speech I gave, my response to that torrent of abuse that I got for 2-3 minutes solid, that literally drew the whole thing to a halt at one point, has been viewed by over 12 million people just on my Instagram account. It really struck a chord, and that number is going up literally every day. People saw what happened and were disgusted, and people also saw two sides of a debate, if you could call it that, about Israel. And one side went there to present their view, their analysis, their case based on facts and based on calm and rational discussion. And that's what I went there to do. So that is what I did, whatever they threw at me. And they really certainly threw as much as they could at me in terms of the verbal abuse and the screaming and disruption. But that's what I went to do. And I'm a great believer in discussion and debate, civil discourse. These are all important things. And I think that perhaps not so many people in the world do agree with me on that anymore, especially in university campuses. But it's therefore my job, your job, all of our jobs, and I hope if you do go to the Oxford Union and speak, you can drive this message home there yourself as well, both through your words and your example. If they see people who are willing to listen and discuss and debate respectfully and even disagree with one another respectfully, perhaps that will be an example for how to act and behave in the future. Perhaps I'm naive in thinking that, but I believe that that is one way we must do it. And I will say that I was not afraid of those people. I'm not afraid of bullies, and I'm not afraid of people who try to shout me down. The very thing that triggered off the main torrent of abuse in my speech was simply a section where I talked about facts, statistical facts about the amount of aid that had been going into the Gaza Strip during that difficult war period. Right. That is what triggered it. So if facts were what triggered those people, we're really in trouble. But those people don't represent all of Oxford University. I don't think they even necessarily represent the whole of the Oxford Union membership. They represented a very specific group of people who I believe were handpicked to be in that room and positioned to cause as much trouble as they could. But either way, the world saw them for who they are, and I hope they saw me for who I am and the rest of my team in that debate. And slowly, all we can do is speak the truth, go out there, spread the message, make our case, try to persuade people, That's what I do in my work every day. And I sometimes reform my ideas myself, listening to others. And I think that's an important aspect of all of our lives as well, that we must keep open minds. We must discuss together in good faith and honestly, based on fact and logic and morals and good ethics. And hopefully truth and light will win out if we can engage in that way. And part of that is to punish and with the full force of the law and justice, those who abuse the systems that we have in place in the West, those who abuse our very systems to attack us and work against us. That has to end, whether it's in a university debating society, in Oxford University or anywhere else, or whether it's at the highest level in governments or in police or in society at large. We have to stand up to it. So that's really what I hope is the message of the Oxford Union, but also of everything that any of us can do in our lives. We must lead by example.
Well, you're certainly a good example of leading by example. You certainly have a fan and a supporter in me, and I was very proud of the way you delivered the message, factually, empirically supported, and I thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. I want to respect your time because I know you have something else that you have to get to. This has been enlightening as well as inspirational, so thank you. I look forward to meeting you in person, hopefully very soon, and I hope we can talk some more about this in the not too distant future.
With pleasure, and thanks so much for having me, and thanks for all that you do.
Well, thank you. We'll talk soon. So long.